Hello everyone, and welcome to my studio again. Today I wanted to have a conversation with you about another alternate clay material that you might explore, especially useful for building these non-conventional material vessel forms, which is of course papier-mâché. Many of you may have worked with papier-mâché before, some of you haven't. So I just wanted to go through a few simple tips about how to get started with papier-mâché and some of the things to think about as you're beginning your exploration with what it can do for you as you're building sculpturally. So first of all, I'm actually going to leave the frame, boop, and you'll see my hands hopefully working. So the first thing is, it's made of flour and water, and it's a very simple recipe. You want 1 part flour, in my case 1.5 cups. I'm going to put it in the mixing bowl again. And 2 parts water, which is in my case 3 cups. So I'm going to just mix it together. Okay. I need to start to integrate the water and the flour. If you have a whisk at home in the kitchen somewhere, it's a nice way to do this. I have a big stiff brush, also a fork, your hand. And the goal is to have a consistency that is like pancake batter mix, if you've ever, so it's kind of thin. You don't want it to be like a paste, you want it to be watery and thin. And I'm trying to eliminate all of the lumps. What's good after the whisking is you could also, if you have one of those electric emulsion blenders, that would be good to really make it lump-free. So this is going to be the paste that you can encaustically combine with something like newspaper to create a material that will bind. Each strip that you build with will bind to it with this kind of paste, and as it dries, it becomes kind of hardened. If you want it to be harder, instead of flour and water, you could try white glue, like Elmer's glue, mixed with water to make a more thin solution that you dip your paper into to make the building material. The other thing to think about here is some people don't like the smell of this. I don't mind it personally. If you wanted to alter the smell and make it more aromatic, aromatherapy, if you will, you could add a pinch of cinnamon here, and that's very nice. Another thing to think about would be to make a kind of colored paste. And again, I have these leftover Easter egg dyes, which are really kind of potent and are something that I just saved because I hate throwing stuff out. So I'm going to take this sort of red one, put a few drops in, make kind of a mess because that's what I do. And I have this really, oh my God, I love pink, beautiful pink paste, which will be papier-mâché paste. Really nice if I wanted to create a form that referenced the body, a fleshy kind of color, right? Okay, so this solution should be stored, could be stored in a jar, you know, a container like an old yogurt container, something airtight, in your refrigerator for a few days and before you use it. I, in the best spirit of cooking shows, am going to continue on and just use this. Even though it's probably not really ideal to do so. So the other part of our first project is really about building some kind of non-conventional or ritual use vessel out of non-ceramic materials. So what I've done is looked around my studio, but you can look around your house for things that are throwaway materials. We all have tons of them. The best place to start looking for armatures for your papier-mâché might be your recycling bin. These are little foam trays that I actually kind of abhor, that, you know, every carrot in my supermarket is plastic wrapped around one of these things. So I've just been saving them, thinking somehow I could use them someday. And I have a lot of them. So what I did was I created this structure from them, just using regular blue tape. You could use masking tape. You know, you'd have to sort of, you could use, maybe you could thread them, use a tension system around them with thread or wire, you know, whatever you have around that could sort of hold them together to create a kind of structure from them. And this is what I'm going to use to build my papier-mâché around. It needs a kind of structured armature, because when you're adding these strips of pasted material, they're very wet and weak until they harden through dryness. So I'm going to begin building on this armature with, I have newspaper. Again, many of you may not have newspapers in your home. Any kind of paper-like material could be, you know, used. You'll have to experiment, but newspaper's great. It's actually better than cutting even strips. It's better to tear them into strips. The torn edges somehow allow this to lay flat against what I'm building on. So you can really use any kind of structured material as an armature. You could make balls of newspaper and tape it to create a more structured shape, and then start laminating with your papier-mâché. So I'm just putting my strips around, and I'm going to, how I build the layers could also lead to a kind of structure to the form I'm creating. So I'm going to be building them in multiple angles instead of all in the same direction, to kind of use the geometry of the triangulation of the strips to also kind of give a kind of structure. You could also use regular white glue. After all of this is built and dried, you could brush some white glue on the surface for extra strength. The wheat paste or the flour paste papier-mâché will have less hardness than the glue would give it, the white glue would give it. Again, all of these materials that we're talking about right now are materials that you might already have in your home, that could be obtained from the grocery store, which we all still have access to as our quarantined sort of shelter-in-place art studios need something like that. There are many materials, of course, many of you can get by ordering online from traditional art suppliers, and we'll have a chance to talk about that as we go through the second half of the semester. But for now, look around your house or the supermarket. So I'm going to just keep building these strips on top. You'll have the chance to kind of let things be registered tightly against the structure of what it is you're building on, or of course it could start to separate. Again, you'll start to, over dryness, get some hardness to work with. So this is just really the way it's built. Okay, I would probably do for, you know, I have this foam that's going to remain in this for structure, to give it a kind of hardness and structure in addition to the papier-mâché strips. But I would probably want to build up a few coats of these strips, 2 to 3, just to give it a nice... I'm also hoping to deal with some of this non-fit issue by building up the papier-mâché to make a more smooth transition between the parts of my foam trays, where I tried to join them very roughly and crudely. Other materials that make good armatures for papier-mâché, this is tin foil, okay? So I could also tape this foil to the foam and have this to build the strips around to create a kind of loopy handle-like structure. So anything lightweight that has some structure to take the weight of the water and the newspaper until it has a chance to harden into what it will become as dried paper mache would be good. The other thing I would add, I forgot to say, is if you're working in a humid area or environment, which, you know, in the Northeast we generally do have, in this time of year particularly with all the spring rains coming, you might want to add a tablespoon of salt to your flour and water mixture. It will keep it from molding. It kind of gives it an anti-mold quality, because these are our organic materials that will degrade over time. So they don't stay forever, okay? So you really have to kind of use them sooner, not later. Okay, so that's it for this little video. And I'll be back later to talk about some other things. Thanks for coming. Bye.